Misty Wallace was 18 years old back in October of 1992. She was in grade 12, preparing to go to college on a softball scholarship and study nursing in Indiana. On that October night, with a chill in the air, she had pulled her blue Mustang into a Burger King parking lot to call her parents on a payphone. As she was about to hang up, a young man approached her and asked if she was done with the phone. She told him that she was, hung up, and as she turned around, the man shoved a gun in her face and pulled the trigger. Misty remembers lying beneath the front wheel of her car, her ears ringing from the shot, her face burning from the gunpowder. She prayed that the man wouldn't be able to start her car, and seconds later she heard the stranger running away. Help arrived, rushed Misty to the hospital where she underwent multiple surgeries. You see, the bullet had gone through her cheek, nicked an artery, and nestled in the upper two vertebrae of her spine. The gunman hadn't been identified or found, but Misty was alive. In fact, a month after the shooting, miraculously, with staples down her face and wearing a neck brace, she was out of the hospital and able to drive. That's when she met the gunman for a second time. As she pulled into an intersection, there he was, in the car across from hers. She quickly wrote down his license plate number, and a short time later, the man was behind bars. His name was Keith Blackburn. He was 18 and messed up in a life of drugs and crime. At trial, Blackburn didn't look at Misty and denied any involvement. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and that's the last Misty would ever have to see or deal with him. She was now free to move on and build a life, while Blackburn remained locked in prison. But building a life and living free was harder than she ever imagined. Misty got married, had 2 kids, got divorced, but then the trauma of her shooting was resurrected when she heard that Blackburn was released in 2001. Immediately, she went to the courthouse to file a restraining order, and she once again attempted to find peace and build her life. 9 years later, in 2010, Misty realized that she had been in a prison of her own of fear and panic attacks and anger for nearly 20 years, and she had had enough. Searching Facebook, she found Keith Blackburn in a photo with his wife and 4 kids. Her sense was that she needed to reach out to him, so she began composing a message. For months, she would write, erase, write again, and erase, but could never hit the send button. Finally, she knew she just needed to do it, and this is what she wrote. "I'm not angry with you anymore, but I do have questions. Can we talk?" What she didn't know was that Keith Blackburn had made a break with his old life 3 years into his prison sentence. Someone had led him to Christ, and he began studying the Bible, getting an education, and accepting full responsibility for what he had done. Misty and Keith corresponded on Facebook for a year, sharing their stories, their regrets, Keith owning what he had done, Misty telling of how the bullet had completely changed her life and caused her so much pain, Keith asking for forgiveness, and Misty forgiving. Today, Keith is a prison chaplain, and together Keith and Misty speak for an organization called Bridges for Life, a restorative justice program, and Misty has lived out this aspect of character we're going to study today. Character is irrationally kind. Welcome to week 2 of this brand new series we're calling Character Is, a study of the Old Testament book of 2 Samuel. Last week, we briefly reviewed what happened in 1 Samuel and then launched into our 52nd book of the Bible on our 1100-day chapter day reading adventure. In a nutshell, Israel asked God for a king. God said, "That's not a good idea," but granted their request. Their first king, Saul, was awesome at first and then became unhinged. When the shepherd boy, giant killer named David started gaining popularity, Saul became threatened and went on a 7-year hunt to kill David. David ran and hid for his life until King Saul died in a battle at the end of 1 Samuel. The book of 2 Samuel opens with David receiving news of Saul's death, and last week we discovered that character is inspiring. As we watched King David respond to Saul's death with remarkable grace, compassion, and respect. We noted last week, character is how you treat someone who can do nothing for you. King Saul was dead and could do nothing for David, but David still treated him with honor, respect, and mourned for him, even though Saul had tried to kill David on numerous occasions. So let me ask you, how did you do with that this week? When you recognize someone who you cross paths with and you realize this is someone who can do nothing for me, how did you view them? How did you speak to them? How did you treat them? That's when true character shines the brightest, when you treat someone who can do nothing for you with dignity, respect, and regard them as worthy of your time, energy, consideration, and appreciation. Well, this week we read 2 Samuel chapter 5 to 11, and I want to zero in on chapter 9. At this point in the book, King David is about halfway through his reign, which means that he has been rid of that tyrant king who tried to kill him for almost 20 years. But David's character is about to burst right off the pages of the Bible once again. Listen to the opening verse of chapter 9. One day, David asked, "Is anyone in Saul's family still alive?" Great question. Is there anyone who belongs to Saul's family that could still be a threat? Is there anyone who's part of Saul's family that escaped punishment? Is there anyone in Saul's family who still needs to make amends or who I need to be leery of? Now, those would be reasonable and logical questions, but that's not what David asked. One day, David asked, "Is anyone in Saul's family still alive? Anyone to whom I can show kindness?" King David has moved from the trauma of Saul's murderous quest. King David has built a palace, expanded Israel's territory, collected a long list of victories, proven himself to be God's anointed, and experienced nothing but success. It would have been so easy for David to forget the past, shake his fist at the earlier trauma, stuff the invisible emotions of hate and vengeance deep into his heart and move on. But he doesn't. David turns, looks over his past and asks, "Is anyone in Saul's family still alive? Anyone to whom I can show kindness?" And once again, we find ourselves surprised by character. And from this chapter, I would have to conclude that character is irrationally kind. It would seem that one of the qualities of character is that it is not conventional or driven by what you would expect. Character is different. Character, when you see it, almost seems to blind you a bit. Character, when you see it oozing out or exploding out of someone's life, always seems a bit contrarian. It always seems a bit alarming as it stands out with contrast against the expected or the predictable. But that's the thing about character. It's not trying to be something, it just is. It doesn't think about how it wants others to see it, it just is. When the pressure is applied, it's what just naturally squeezes out of a person's life. You've probably heard the phrase, "power corrupts," or maybe the more full quote by Lord John Acton, who lived in the 1800s. He said, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men." But is that true? Actually, a study published in the Smithsonian reported its findings and said power doesn't corrupt. It simply heightens pre-existing ethical tendencies. Abraham Lincoln said, "Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power." Power doesn't corrupt a person or make their character bad. Power simply tests a person's character because character is pre-existing inside of a person long before the crisis is ignited, long before the limelight is stepped into, and long before someone is given power. It's what ekes out of a person because that is just who they are. Misty reached back in time, typing on Facebook, "I'm not angry anymore, but I do have questions." And then continuing to give the man who shot her a voice in her life was nothing short of remarkable character. It was an act of illogical kindness and illogical benevolence. King David genuinely reaching out to the family that tried to kill him 20 years earlier and asking, "Is there anyone left in Saul's family that I can bless, that I can show kindness to?" is nothing short of stunning, brilliant character. As we read further in chapter 9, David manages to find a servant from King Saul's household who lets David know that King Saul had a grandson named Mephibosheth. David locates Saul's grandson and says, "Don't be afraid. I intend to show kindness to you because of my promise to your father, Jonathan. I will give you all the property that once belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will eat here with me at the king's table. And then verse 13, and Mephibosheth, who was crippled in both feet, lived in Jerusalem and ate regularly at the king's table. Now, I want you to note that having a character that expresses itself with illogical and irrational kindness means you are willing to take a risk for the sake of another. A grandson of King Saul could have easily made a claim or a run for the throne. A grandson of King Saul could have easily been carrying so much hatred and animosity towards David that he was toxic and dangerous. If David was wanting to play it safe, he would never have tried to reach back and contact Mephibosheth. But David was more concerned with Mephibosheth's well-being than his own comfort and even safety. Misty ran the same risk in reaching back and trying to make contact with the man who shot her. But you see, that's a marker of true character. It risks for the sake of another. It is willing to feel the burn of uncertainty, if only for the chance to make someone else's life better. You know, this past week I came across a news story that once again took my breath away. When I read it, I felt the familiar mix of shock, inspiration, and amazement. It felt like I was on the trail of another case of strong character exploding out of a person's life in the midst of a crisis. It also felt like I was witnessing the illogical and irrational kindness that is so often associated with true character. In a few minutes, I want to tell you what that moment was like for me and some of the news story details and let you be the judge of character. But before we do, let's take a few minutes to worship the source and ultimate example of true character, Jesus himself. I mean, talk about someone who took a risk when he really didn't need to, reached back, didn't focus on our failures and brokenness and depravity, but showed us irrational and illogical kindness. So how would you finish the phrase, character is? That wasn't a rhetorical question. If you're with your family, your friends, your spouse, your kids, I actually want you to think about and talk about as many endings to that phrase as you can in 40 seconds. If you're by yourself, take your phone or a piece of paper and make your own list. Are you ready? Let's put 40 seconds on the clock and see how many you can come up with. Character is. So how did you do? Well, here are a few of the ones that I have. Character is inspiring. Character is fragile. Character is the moral strength to do the right thing. Character is both formed and revealed. Character is integrity in action. Character is doing the right thing for the right reasons. Character is formed over time. Character is the foundation stone that makes a person truly wealthy. Someone once said, character is the diamond that scratches all other stones. Someone else said, character is much easier kept than recovered. Character is walking a mile in someone's shoes. Character is how you treat someone who can do nothing for you. And character is irrationally, illogically kind. So let's ask this question. What is kindness? Now, I realize that sounds a bit obvious, but let's take a moment to dig into it a little bit more. In 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1, David is on a mission to find any surviving family of King Saul and show them hesed, kindness. Hesed is the original ancient Hebrew word which is translated kindness. But what does it actually mean? Well, here are how some Bible scholars define hesed. Hesed is to bow and treat another like an equal. Hesed is to take pains to show courtesy. Hesed is when a person with power supplies critical care and courtesy to someone of lesser power. Think about it. King David had all the power. Yet he took pains to show courtesy to Mephibosheth. King David humbled himself, regarded Mephibosheth as worthy, and the king bowed his head to Mephibosheth, treating him as an equal. King David had all the power, so he leveraged that power not to serve himself, but to reach back 20 years, find someone in his past who needed some help, even though he was running a risk to do so, and used his power to make Mephibosheth's life better. So let me tell you of my encounter with this aspect of character this past week. I came across a news story out of Calgary. In the early morning hours of Canada Day, someone had defaced and vandalized Grace Presbyterian Church in Calgary by throwing red paint across the doors. Naturally, the police were called, and they immediately began investigating these actions not only as vandalism, but also as a hate crime. Well, to tell the rest of the story, join me in a conversation with the pastor of Grace Presbyterian Church. Well, Pastor Jake, it is great to be able to speak with you today. Tell me a little bit about the church that you pastor.
So I'm one of the ministers at Grace Presbyterian Church, and we're located in the Beltline neighborhood of Calgary. We're surrounded by neighbors of many different ethnicities and ages and different ideas about what the church should be. And so our vision is transforming lives through God's grace, and so we're really trying to live that out in engaging with our neighbors and helping our congregation both share God's story in our neighborhood and to be aware of where God's story is leading us into our neighborhood as well.
Yeah, wonderful. Now, you obviously are quite aware of the unmarked graves that have been found in various residential schools. We've been talking as a church a little bit about this, and I understand that just this last week, your church was actually vandalized with the red paint across the doors. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so on the evening of, well, actually early morning of Canada Day, our church had two of its front doors splattered with red paint.
How did you find out? How did someone phone you, or did you drive by, or
Actually, I found out someone posted a picture on Twitter.
when you saw that and you knew it was your church, you recognized the doors of your church? What emotions went through you?
At first, it was like just the question of why. Then I just had to kind of sit with that question for a bit. And the Presbyterian Church has in Canada has done a bunch of work to in truth and reconciliation, and so we've released all of our records. We've we've donated to funds and made some reparations.
So I don't know the history of the Presbyterian Church and residential schools. Did the Presbyterian Church, was it one of those churches that ran residential schools, and how many?
The Presbyterian Church ran 11 schools up to 1925. And then in the church union movement, where the United Church of Canada was formed, many of those schools were transferred over to the United Church, but the Presbyterian Church ran two schools um, and up until 1969. And so after that sort of question of why, it was reflecting a little bit on that history and recognizing that with this paint, that it signified something more than just red paint. I recognized we could be angry about red paint and we could rush to kind of quickly scrub it away, but maybe we just needed to sit with the red paint for a
So
while.
that would have been my reaction. I mean, if we had red paint and vandalized and graffitied across our church, I think the first thing I'd be out there with a pressure washer with the different solutions. I'd get that cleaned up. I try to erase it right away. That is not what you did. You had a completely different, somewhat in my mind, irrational kind of irrational kindness sort of reaction. Tell us what your reaction ended up being.
We talked through this, and really what we decided was, let's leave the paint at least until July 8th, so for a week, and perhaps we'll go beyond that, just as a way of saying, can we recognize the pain, the grief, the lament that this paint on our doors represents? And so um,
Now, the
it's
Calgary police are actually investigating this as a hate crime. Again, in an act of illogical kindness, you actually pushed back and said you didn't think it was a hate crime. Explain how you came to that conclusion.
this was just, I mean, this expresses pain and grief and lament, and it is a part of our history. Like, it's a part of our collective story. And so um instead of just trying to kind of scrub that away or whitewash it, like, a part of truth and reconciliation is saying truth. And so just in sitting with the paint, like sitting on the front steps of our church, um, it's powerful to sit with that. And so almost like a, a prayer of confession in some ways, and just confessing, yeah, this is a part of who we are. And so to move forward from that, can we both sit with the voices of pain and lament and grief that this has caused, and also enter into conversations that may not be easy conversations, but that are good conversations, and a way forward.
You know, when I read the article and saw your response, I was taken aback. I was a bit shocked. It spoke of character to me, character for you as a pastor, your team, your church, that you would allow that red paint to be on those doors for a week or more, because you cared so much. You cared more about the people who were violated and hurt and were hurting than you did your own reputation or building, or and it just spoke of such character. And one of the things we're studying today is that character is illogical kindness. And I just think that this irrational, illogical kindness is what you modeled. And I just really respect that, and you've inspired me today. And I want to thank you for sharing your story and for modeling Christ in such a powerful way there in Calgary.
Yeah, thanks, Pastor Todd. It's been really interesting. And my hope and my prayer in all of this is that stories of sort of this illogical kindness and stories of character and compassion um, become more mainstream and not the outliers. The story has actually started something that's much bigger, and now this kind of good but challenging work really begins. And so to say that we want to be in conversation with the community, we now have to live into that, and find ways to do that. And so it's good, and I'm excited about that and where this may lead, Grace.
I love the fact that your sign says Grace Presbyterian, but it's not just on your sign, it's in your hearts. And thanks for modeling that grace with such character for us today. God bless you.
Yeah, thank you. God bless all of you as well. It's great to be with you.
Character is irrationally and illogically kind. Pastor Jake had all the power in this situation. He has a large, ornate, beautiful historical church building. He has insurance on the church. He has the laws of Alberta behind him. He has the police resources. He has access to pressure washers and restoration services. And he has a church full of people that he could stir up and rally to get angry if he wanted. However, he didn't react in the most logical and rational way, leaning into his power, but rather used his power to lean into other people's pain, more concerned for what they were feeling and experiencing than having a clean and respectable looking church building, honoring their story, their agony, and just sitting with it. Misty did what no one expected. She reached back, bowed down, and treated the man who shot her with respect, dignity, and took great pains to show him courtesy, even at great risk to herself. King David did what no one expected. He reached back, bowed down, treated the grandson of the man who tried to kill him multiple times with respect, dignity, and he took great pains to show him courtesy, even at great risk to himself. Pastor Jake and the people of Grace Presbyterian Church in Calgary, in essence, they reached back and owned their role in the residential schools, bowed down and treated those who defaced their church with red paint with respect and dignity, and took great pains to show them courtesy, even at great risk to themselves. So you know what's coming, don't you? How about you? Is there someone you need to reach back to? Is there someone you need to take a risk and reach out to and bow your head as an equal and take pains to show courtesy to? Is there someone in your life who deserves to tell their story if you will only take time to listen? Do you hold power over someone? Maybe they wronged you, so you have the power of them owing you. Maybe they made a mistake, so you have the power of being right. Maybe they were just less fortunate, so you have the power of being more fortunate. Maybe they struggle, so you have the power of feeling more together. Maybe they lack resources, so you have the power of more resources. But is there someone you need to show some irrational and illogical kindness to? Now, let me insert a bit of a disclaimer here, because I know this is going to mess some people up. This isn't a blanket challenge for everyone, regardless of your circumstances. For some, this could be the worst idea ever. For some, it's just not the right time. After all, it took Misty nearly 20 years and King David over 20 years to come to this place. For some, you aren't ready. And for others, you'll never be ready. And you shouldn't feel any pressure or guilt. For some, the worst thing you could do is reach back, reach out, and set yourself up to be re-victimized. My best advice to you is to whisper a little prayer that says, God, is this message for me or for someone else today? God, is there something you want me to do with this? Or is this just not what you are speaking to me personally about? And then be at peace with the answer. For some of us, God will bring someone to mind, and he'll say, this is a risk I want you to take. But for many others, I believe God's going to say, be at peace. That part of the message wasn't for you. But the part of the message that is for all of us is this: character is irrationally kind. Character is leveraging the power we hold to benefit others, even if it costs us something. And isn't that exactly what our perfect, holy God has done for us?